Hello, everyone. Welcome on Next Friday Dose. Today we have a special guest, and I changed the language into the English or Ponglish. It depends how bad my English is right now. But I'm thrilled to have a really special guest for me personally, but I believe also for the most of the storage and backup recovery people who seen and watch the market in last 20 years. So let me introduce the Ed Walsh to our Friday Dose.
Thanks for having me. This is great. Good seeing you. Sorry I
Our,
couldn't be there in person, by the way.
yeah, so Ed, thanks because I know you are hopefully you're early bird because you have like 8, 9. What time we have right now?
It's 8 o'clock. It's not
8 o'clock.
early. It's
8 o'clock. Well,
that's
you,
easy,
you
right?
you wave your hand, so it doesn't matter. To be honest. So in Central European time, we have exactly 2 p.m. So first of all, I would like to thank you to join our discussion and have you for 1 hour interview.
Love
We
it.
have tons of different things that I would like to speak with you.
Okay.
We know each other since the last few
Wow.
years. We
Yep.
we had a chance to speak face to face, and I remember when I wrote when we had the first meeting, I wrote some posts on LinkedIn that I truly admires the leaders who already proved how should the backup and recovery or the storage industry should looks like. You've been the general manager in IBM there,
Yeah.
so just to inform you that you still officially my true inspiration. uh,
Right.
and now sometimes from time to time maybe some copy of the things inside the store.
I think it's great.
Yeah. So we have today a topic like we will talk a little bit about the big data. We have subjects regarding big data, but
Sure.
before that, definitely we would like to understand, let's say, your path in the last 20 years, how
Sure.
you moved through the different companies, and to actually set it up and understand why you here and how you see the existing markets. So we
Okay.
let's right now do some small time machine like 20 years before, and
Okay.
let's imagine that 20 years ago speaking about the
Okay.
data and backup recovery market without this knowledge what happens these last 20 years.
That's a good question. So how would I so one more time, let's just okay, time machine back 20 years.
Yeah.
What year would that put us? So that okay, so okay, right after the dot-com crash. I love it. I would actually be talking about the market a lot the same that I would talk about it now. Data is increasing. It's a challenge for everyone. In fact, some markets are moving very fast. Like you talked about backup recovery is moving very fast. At the time, it was very incremental based. So there's a lot of disruption that was about to happen. I'm going back to 2002. And and it was a hard market. Data was growing, and to be honest, it was incrementally based. So the solutions for clients were just really incrementalism. They're getting a little bit better, and then some disruption came in later on, and probably 10 years after 2002 that really changed the market. And you see that for big markets. I happen to like big markets that are. I look for markets that are really hard. Yes, large and growing, but more importantly, when you see a lot of incrementalism, things that are just moving together slowly. Like everything gets a little bit better, but it doesn't really solve the major challenges. And that's where backup was probably 2002, right? We were still doing full backups. We're trying to do weekend backups, incremental, and that was right before it hit. Same thing about big data. We'll talk about that. Big data wasn't big, but it's the same concept. It would be the same dialogue you had about big data, be data driven. It just was a different technology stack. And we can talk about that industry as well. So I don't know if
So
that
in
helps. It was a good
2002
question. Time
we
machine. I'm
already
not quite
had
sure.
Mhm. In
Okay, go ahead.
2002 we already had the duplication because today when we saying dedupe, it's obvious for most of the storage and backup and recovery market. So dedupe,
Sure.
just we can shrink the data, we just keep the single version of the data from the block. We have a
Yeah.
different technology behind the scenes. How was in 2000? Let's come back again because it
Yeah.
was in most cases it was this to tape, yes, technology.
everything went to tape, and it was really before dedupe. So dedupe was a silly word that we at Avamar were the first ones to use. I'm not saying we owned the word, but in backup was the first time we were using it. And that was really 2005. Data domain was in the same space. CAS, they were talking about content aware storage at the point. Same in the underlying technology, just different ways to talk about it. But so before that, it was full back to tape. It was a big challenge for people. But it was kind of the underbelly. It was the technical folk that had to deal with it, and the business folk just, only needed it when they absolutely had to. So anyway,
Okay. And so
I like the time machine question. So I'm trying
it's
to
a
think of
time machine question. I will not go deep dive in the 30 or 40 years, so no worries here.
no,
Uh,
it's good.
because this is actually combined with your path, how you change the companies, or how the companies that
Gotcha.
you've been were acquired to the bigger players. So let's
Yep.
come back right now a little bit to the Avamar. So I would like to better
Yeah, sure.
understand the uniqueness that days, so 2005 plus, and I would like to understand what was the culture behind the scenes, because I
Oh,
believe that your team that days knew that you're doing something unique that is not easily you cannot easily copy this innovation from the other players. Actually, the data domain did the same. Yes.
yep, sure. Yeah, okay. So if you think about the culture, what's not known about Avamar and probably almost every startup, I would say if you mentioned data to me, I'm sure they'll have the same story. They knew they had something, but they didn't know how to describe it. They didn't know exactly the market segment to go over, how to package it. So when I got involved there, they want to do the new way of doing backup. No one really wanted a new way of doing backup. Now, what they wanted was to get out of what we're doing today. So basically, when I went in there, so I was hired as CEO in June 2005. It was pretty obvious early that they had kind of early product issues. In fact, at one point, we stopped shipping product for about 90 days that summer just to kind of fix some issues. So a lot of people don't know the behind the scenes. So if anyone's doing a tech startup, reality is your friend. Listen to clients, and sometimes you got to do what's the outside world doesn't make some sense, but you have to basically move forward and make sure you take care of clients so that you can get those, that beachhead and move forward. So the culture, listen, they knew they had something. It was a ground up, clean sheet of paper architecture, go after a big market that was growing, but largely incremental improvements in that market for 20 years. Largely, it was the same way to do backups. We're still doing weekend backups, nightly backups, and it had to change. And then once we changed it, by the way, you look back at the industry, you would never imagine if you had to take down all your systems every weekend to back them up. You couldn't possibly imagine doing that right now with the online transactions you have to do. But at that moment, that's basically what you did. So basically, going into Avamar, the storyline would be the inside story would be we came in, they knew they had a good solution set. They were hardware, software, appliance going after the mid market, and they were having some product issues. So basically, I went around the first 2 weeks. I would recommend to anyone starting a new job, talk to everyone in the customer in the company, talk to customers, and it became clear we had some product issues that they were very straightforward. It wasn't hard to find out. We needed to fix these three things, and there were three
Mm-hmm.
things. And it was pretty easy to get everyone's head around, but it was one of those moments of reality is your friend, and set a strategy that meets the situation. So we had to first get the product working, and we did that with the help of our customers. And it took us about 90 days. You fix the first couple things, and to be honest, there's always a couple more things afterwards. Once we got it going, basically, then we had a working product, and then we had to look at what we're doing as far as the messaging, the executive team, what was a go-to-market, and in 6 months, we went from being a hardware software appliance. So we would ship it in white box PCs with software in it. Average sale price around 28,000, and hardware software mix. And there wasn't a lot of renewal business. 6 months later, once we started working with, I'll tell you how we got there. We went to a software only model, focused more on enterprises, not SMB. And that software model was an average sale price around $250,000. So dramatically different, and also 100% software with good
Mm-hmm.
renewal business and stickiness to it. So rather dramatic. And the reason for it is sometimes you have to pause and you say, what's this technology good for? Who gets the most advantage from it? who's going to, yeah, you say who can pay for it, but more importantly, who's going to really not be able to live without this technology? And that was the enterprises at the time. Now we also worked the executive team. And 6 months later, we had the new marketing, new CFO. By the way, really good people in the company. It just the team dynamics, especially board dynamics, it just made it impossible to move forward sometimes. So we had to get the team, and that's the investors, also the team itself, and to move forward, and then really new messaging.
Mhm.
So instead of being the new way to do backup, we launched in February. I'm trying to think. I used to know the dates, right? So February of 2006, we launched basically, basically what have your backup done for you lately? And we talked about deduping your data, which was a new word at the time. And dedupe your data. And instead of going through 15 pages, 20 minutes of technology, here's our 5 patents, it turned into 1 page. I dedupe your data. I'll get back to it. But what you get is your backup windows go down by 10x and you get free DR.
What I like from this story is that you are part of some innovation that changing is a game changer for the existing markets. We are right now talking about the backup, of course,
Yep.
but in the storage and also the storage in the cloud is actually I believe we are in 2022 and we have the same game changing path that we
Yep.
can later on discuss. But
Yep.
this is interesting because we know that there will be some changes, but
Yep.
we're still, avoiding it and keeping the old way how to work, etc. What's your best lesson learned from the Avamar? I'm talking about the people, team, etc. I would like to, inspire all of our audience who maybe they building the startup or working in the IT industry.
Yeah. So just real quickly, last comment. Listen, I think all these markets, they don't repeat themselves. History doesn't repeat itself, but the echoes, it really sounds similar, right? So basically, there's lessons learned in all these, and they do replay themselves in new markets. So, and then you asked about the team. The biggest lesson learned there, I had a great team. It wasn't me, the team. We worked the team through, hey, what's the best next step of the company? And I learned early, it wasn't there, but I learned early, if you have the right team, it looks easy. In fact, I get all the time, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I went to Avamar, they mentioned my 5 companies. You went there, it was just luck. It's half it is you got to make sure the right team. And I give more credit to the team than anything else.
Mhm.
And then if I was the biggest lessons learned is, you know, you gotta think big. You also have to have reality is your friend. So Avamar was mostly have the confidence, but work with the team. And we had a great team, and I added to the team, but the team has to move it forward. And without the good team, nothing happens really well. And then reality is your friend. And what I mean by that is in more than one occasion, as I went in companies, and this is, I would give this to anyone, as you're evolving a company or product, big company, small company, you need to take a step back and see what's the right
Mhm.
next step. And do you change what you're doing to go to market? A lot of people never change. And that's where they get into what I'll say is dark alleys. They keep going down. So Avamar was a good example of think bigger, reality your friend. It wasn't hard for, me with a team to figure out real quickly what we had to do on product. It wasn't hard really quickly to say, why aren't we getting repeat business? Well, it's not perfect for that particular market segment. So then you think reality is your friend. Now I'm about to change the company rather dramatically, not the technology, but rather dramatically how we talk about ourselves, what
Mhm.
we actually deliver from a product standpoint, who's our partners. Everything changed in 6 months, actually 9 months. So June, we launched it in February. So I guess lesson learned is, I always say, listen, reality is your friend. My other favorite thing is hope, and it's not a plan. You have to have a plan, execute it with a
Mhm.
team. Um, and that one was disruptive technology, hard technology. By the way, this is more, think about all these different market segments. They don't necessarily repeat completely, but they definitely rhyme.
Mhm.
And so hard technology goes into an existing market. It's really hard initially because you're competing with a really robust solution from incumbents that have put this product together for quite some time. So if you go into any big enterprise, let's face it, they have every bell and whistle, every optimization possible. So what you have to do is find your entry point. And it's hard sledding is a term I use. I don't know, make sure, you're trying to sled uphill. You're trying to go uphill compared to downhill. But once you get the product in the account, they see how disruptive it is and how it changes the game. The product maturity needs to get a point where they're willing to make that trade-off and go all in with you, not just the early adopters, but all in with you. And that's what a natural, you can talk about, crossing the chasm from Jeffrey Moore talks about it. But to me, all these markets, if you're going to do a clean sheet of paper, disrupt these big markets, which is what I like to do. That's if I was going to give you my theme, that's what I like to do in my career. The biggest thing is at first it's hard, but you got to really focus on differentiation, really focus on the early clients, nail the right go to market, the right ideal customer profile, and think about, but sometimes you have to take a step back and say, I know this is where we're going, but is this the right direction? And be brave enough, but also, trust your gut and the gut of the team to kind of lay a path. So Avamar was, it wasn't a pivot. It was, but if you think of everything we did other than the code, it was a rather different company, and 9 months after the new team arrived. And the existing, by the way, I want to be clear, the existing team was just rock solid. It just sometimes fresh eyes from the outside, it's like, we got to really rethink this. And is this a better path? And I'll say that I had a great team to begin with, the founding team there. But then we added a couple things, and that's where you want the diversity of team and who can get you to the next level. So I don't know.
That's great. For your eyes, when you'll see the Ed Wall, is a shirt from the Avama, and I think most of these crucial people I just signed them. Yes. So this is a nice trophy, I guess, from the past.
Yeah. Also, all the stuff behind me is something from my teams, or so that was a shirt that Avamar after acquisition, a bunch of them signed. I ended up getting framed, but you even see even the dog Q. So one of our engineers, Jen, one of our best engineers, right? So she had a dog in the office called Q after the James Bond, character.
Okay.
And you see a little paw prints, but literally that is a team. It was a tight team. It was 30 people. So you think about what you can do and disrupt the market. It doesn't take an army, but this team was like rock stars. So anyway, these are all just, I don't know, different things given to me over the years.
I just posted early morning. Yesterday we have a party, 8th anniversary of Storware. So we are nearly 50 people. So I fully understand, what the culture of to know each other well. So each name, what they doing, what they driving, and how to try, as a collective team nail the market. So 8 years. Really tough times. No, it's not that it's always going like this, but lots of fun, and looking forward for future. But let's right now move from the Avamar, and then Avamar was sold to the Dell. Then you just doing it again. You go into Storware, you build a new team, and again the Storware is acquired by the other one of the biggest players on the market, IBM. So do you see the repetitiveness, and what maybe which actual events let's say gave you this information? Hey, this is the right path, or this is this point, a milestone that I should do once again, or each company that would like to rule the market, rock the market, or nail the market, should be aware of. So again, I'm asking you about some hints and tips for other pros who would like to let's say go with this kind of the journey.
Yeah. So, okay. So more, so how did I pick Storwise, and how did that go into? So Storwise was an Israeli company, great team, great investors, Sequoia. And I could tell you almost the exact same story of the other companies. You get a call. I founded my first company, but after this, to be honest, I'm better at, if I find a good technical team, I know how to get them to the next level, right? So it's a
Mhm.
combination of me plus a technical team, right? So they had it done well, and it was described to me almost like Avamar was, but it was like, we're going to disrupt the primary storage market, and the primary storage market hasn't caught up with all these other disruptions, largely incremental for years. Um, and it's a big market and it was about doing real-time storage optimization, but on primary storage, which at the moment people thought were crazy. Like, what do you mean you're going to do, the equivalent of dedupe or compression of primary storage, which is known for high performance? Like, no way that can work. And so my first conversation with the investor Shamil Levy from Sequoia, who's wonderful, I said, listen, if that works, I'm in. Right? It was one of those quick 5-minute conversations. But then in it's like, it is the same echoes. Can you go and be disruptive? Clean sheet of paper. They went after it differently. In fact, it was something they could add into all these different arrays. It wasn't something that they built a particular array to do. And it allowed them to kind of look at a broader market ecosystem. And then that was another one, Reality, your friend. Again, great founding team. The way they were trying to deploy the technology, and they've been at it a bit, was to put a high-end Intel-based server in front of your EMC storage array or NetApp storage array. And it had some rough edges to it, right? And that wasn't exactly what the market was looking like for a format. So we work with them, one, to just nail, I can compress your storage, dedupe your storage on your primary storage. So this is your databases pounding away without performance degradation. In fact, could we make the claim in some use cases, if I do this right, your actually performance will go up? By the way, similar to Avamar, it was your backup performance went up because we changed what we did. You kind of clean sheet of paper. We just didn't move data. In Storewise, it was similar. The weakest link in that whole chain was actually performance of disk drives. So by compressing it, you can actually get more throughput of any array. So basically, the way I tell the story is similar to Avamar, going in there, helping them figure out where to put the technology. It was hard tech. Hard tech, sometimes you have to step back and say, okay, this is a use case we're going to go. Let's harden that use case. And we had to do that at Storewise. And no engineering team wants to double down and, they like to do the new stuff. And sometimes you have to say, no, for 6 months, we just need to nail this use case. And we did that. They did awesome. But it was a different format, which was a software. We use the term race engine, random access compression engine. But anyway, so you could add it to other arrays. And that was really the way that multiple storage companies like EMC and IBM and Hitachi were very interested. Now they were skeptical, so we had to prove it out. So like any market, your customers, the early adopters, you find, but then you have to really have that use case so it really goes into production. So that early rough edges of product needs to be worked out, and then you have to work out what's a go-to-market, what's your partners, what's the packaging, and that's what we changed from an appliance-based model to really we're going towards an embedded model. We ended up when they sold to IBM, actually embedded it in their storage arrays, and it's how they got to 5x better ROI on their storage, right? So how can you have the same storage environment handle 5 times the capacity, but also have the same performance? By the way, everyone in the industry follows suit, just like all these things. Dedupe. If you didn't have dedupe, you were dead in the water, like in a very quick succession. It took a while. You mentioned it can take 5-8 years to get a company to that point. But once you get to that point where a critical mass, the product's ready, and you're able to, mainstream companies are able to say, I'm going to move away from this very mature but highly customized. You have enough of my product maturity that I can go. Things take off. Same thing happened with the industry called primary storage. Now, this is 2010. By 2013, 14, there wasn't a storage array before there wasn't a storage array that had any of these capabilities. And 5 years later, if you didn't have these capabilities, you didn't have a storage business. And those are the type of industries I look for. So there are echoes, and trying to think what else. We'll ask more questions if you want more questions about Storewise.
No worries. I'm listening to your story. So, and then okay, so we going then to the one of the biggest
And I, yeah.
corporation, of course, IBM,
Yep.
and you telling lots of about the data driven itself, and then after a while you are successful there, and something happens, so you live in IBM and saying, I'm a challenger, I'm looking for the new challenges,
Yep.
uh, and I would like to better understand mm, you got a few successes. What drives you to do more? And I think this is a quite a space right now for the chaos search, the company where exactly you are. Before we'll go to the big data, uh, but also I would like to I would like to understand what personally drives you to go through there, to leave the comfort zone, because what
Yeah.
we see today, still most of us working hard to make a comfort zone, but there are
Yep.
some percentage of people who, after they take in the comfort zone, they saying, okay, this is a bad thing, I need to leave it, because then
Yeah.
I will go step back. So
Yep.
what exactly drives you in, Ed?
So my wife says I have a broken gene in my DNA. I know there's something's wrong with
This is one of the answers, thank you.
it. So I think, yeah, I love what I do. People, you work hard, you do this. I love it. I think that the mystery of getting a team gelled, because it's all about the team. In fact, it's very rare that I talk about me. Like you're asking direct questions about my background, right? But it's like it's the team that gets it there. But what drives me, I just love challenges, and I find this out. In fact, at school, MIT does this big thing to try to figure out. One thing is it's an entrepreneur class they had, which was, are you a startup person? Or are you better at a big company? And I ended up answering all the questions wrong. And so I ended up being the 2% they called the challengers. They like challenges. So I love the IBM. I love the other ones, but my motivation, it doesn't, I don't have to give myself pep talks. I just love it, right? So I did
Mhm.
take I've had the opportunity to take a couple times, take a year or so off, one on my own, sometimes by lawyers saying you need to take a time off between gigs. But it gives me time to think. I'm a happier person where I'm building things. I'm a better father when I'm building things. And then you mentioned, like, if you're a startup, like if you, I use the term living the dream. And living the dream to me is a code word amongst startup people. It doesn't mean
Mhm.
everything's going great. It means you're running hard. You're getting that up to that critical mass. And boy, it seems like will it ever break through. And you look back on the successes, and in hindsight, you can point back to exactly the moment it kind of took off. But in the midst of it, you absolutely, so the only way I'm able to tell you exactly what happened at Avamar, this is the moment we did this, is because you look back in time. In the moment, it was like, oh my Lord, what did I get myself into? Right. And so, so it's less about and to me, it's not about the money. But the reason I guess the reason I keep everything my team. I love building out teams. To me, people are what makes it work. They're the most interesting. It can also be the most challenging. Having a good functional team, and especially in a hard tech, and keep them motivated and work as a team through good times and challenges. To me, is what's interesting to me. I enjoy that. Like, I truly like working with founding teams and doing it. Now, I also like that at big companies like IBM. I loved working with the team at IBM. I thought it was one of my favorite places. Like, so I never looked at IBM as drudgery. I To me, it was another challenge, different challenge,
Mhm.
all based about innovation, all about hard tech and how do I actually IBM, it was all this hard tech I had to bring to market. IBM has this great research arm. They do have great tech. So the pipeline's there, but it doesn't seem to get to market. So to me, I was an innovator or transformational guy in IBM, just like I'd say for Storewise um,
Mhm.
or FR or Chaos. I help the team. How do you take this asset and really transform an industry? I'm kind of rambling, so hopefully it helps.
Okay. Let's just take a phrase, not chaos age yet, but let's just take a chaos. So what was the toughest places when you've been when you're building a few brands in your, let's say, in your lifetime when you're doing a business? Because we also talk about it. People see only the successes, they don't see the what we need to sacrifice. And there are always
Yep.
pros and cons, the good things and the bad things. We less talking about, and we always trying to forget about what's bad and only remind some good things. But what is the toughest parts that makes you or made you stronger these days?
And
And or
yeah.
what do you think in most businesses that they would like to scale in the future or right now, where they can hit the wall actually?
Okay. So a bunch in there. Biggest challenges. Listen, I think I've been extremely lucky, right? So I've had great teams, I'm like I'm living the dream. I have no, but there are difficult, like, so when I talk to entrepreneur, like, when I tell about the bad things, it's just because every one of these has twists and turns. Every one of them has to get to that point where they break through, and until you break through. So I guess to me, the biggest challenges are either the reality is your friend moment. You have to face reality, and when you have to change things and you have to get a team through that change. But you have the data. It's clear and obvious, but it's maybe unpopular or it's just hard, but you'll know you'll be better for it. And those are any of the tough times. That's it. And by the way, if you just do that, things work out. Compared to if you just don't make the changes that are really, in your heart of hearts, you need to make in the go-to-market product or team. So one is that it's reality is your friend moments. I gave you like Avamar. People really know we stopped shipping product. Now that doesn't reflect badly on the team. It's a wonderful team, unbelievable changing an industry, but you had to kind of face it. And once we did, we moved on. The other one, there's always leaps of faith. I think,
Hmm.
where you have to kind of the data. There's not a lot of data, and you have to trust your gut. And I always like to talk about with friends and mentors, but most of the times I jumped at these companies, most of my friends and mentors would told me not to do it because it was just too risky or stay in the
Okay.
comfort, right? Now then you say, well, why did I do it anyway? But I just had a gut. Like, I like the team. It's to me, it really comes back to the team. I like the team. I saw in the glimmer of my eye, okay, you know what? This could disrupt this big business that's been kind of languishing for a bit. So the biggest, I mean, each one I could tell you the moment of, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? Avamar was within the first 30 days. Oh my gosh. Storewise, oh my gosh, right? But that's not a bad thing. So don't, I guess my message is all companies, if you're doing hard tech, if you're doing simple websites and stuff, okay. But if you're doing hard tech, there's these moments, it's series seed, series A, series B ends up being a really tough one. You haven't really hit scale yet, but you got a couple clients, that is where it can get really hard. And then what I would say is you got to keep your team together. Reality is your friend, have a plan. And then
Hmm.
some of it is you have to have the fortitude to go, and half of it is the journey. You know, it's the success of it gets to the comfort zones, not the outcome. Although it's luring, like but once
Hmm.
you get there, it's like, boy, because I talk about the bad times, like the good times. Like I'm like, that was aw-. You look at those times when you're battling, and you look back and say that was awesome. And of course, even my wife, girlfriend at the time with my first startup, I said, I talk about the glory days. One time she turned to me and with a group of our friends and she says, "What are you talking about? You work like a dog. Like, what are you like? Why?" But it was, and if you're built for that, right? If that's what you want to do and that's what gets you up in the morning, You're going to be a startup person. Now, also, I think startup people, when you get acquired big companies, stay in that zone a little bit, not because of it's a comfort zone, but it stretches different muscles. Working in an
Yeah,
organization, startup is different for a big company, and you can learn. So my first startup, when I sold it, probably 50% of the people left, took the money, and moved on because they didn't want to do a big company. And one, that was challenging, but two, after that, I got better at communicating to the teams. No, no, this is good for you. Even if you just stay for a year or two, learn from the other side, and sometimes rest up, right? And then let's get the right idea. And then you go after the right next startup instead of racing into it. And then you'll learn, because it's just, big companies aren't different, or, well, they are different. But you learn a lot from both, in my opinion. So I always try to get people in
yeah,
my startup teams to stay a little bit, because I think they benefit from it. And most would agree afterwards, but I don't know, some people, people say like, I did, oh,
honestly,
you really got out because, I'm like, no, I kind of loved it there. I just saw the next challenge and I couldn't refuse, right? So uh,
honestly, I couldn't imagine, because I was 4 years in IBM, and I couldn't imagine that I could build the Storware without the knowledge what I learned in IBM, and of
right,
course without my founders like Jan, who also
yeah,
got this
yeah,
experience from the corporation, understanding the processes, how to scale, and I think you need to. The motivation is the key for the longer terms, because we always you ask a questions, does my idea is strong enough to keep like 40, 50 people for the next years? And I
yeah,
remember when I was personally woke up with the huge, let's say, like a ton stone, one 100 kilograms stone on my chest, and I'm thinking, is it me or my ambition, or do I have a right? So you need to have some, you have a knowledge, but also you need to truly believe and keep going with this path, especially if you building a startup. There is no, let's say, it cannot be sure for 50%. It must be 100% or 120.
yeah.
This is how my story it went. But okay, but
But
right now,
but
okay.
before you get off
Mhm.
it, if so, anyone that's doing startups, if you haven't had that moment, it will happen. It's just, um, so that moment,
You will have a doubt, yeah, for sure. Like,
and you get the almost like, I think it's part of. It sounds terrible. I'm not trying to scare people away from doing startups, but that's 100%. That happens to all of us. So if you think it's like, but you have to, and you do have to step back and think about it. But that's how you have to get the breakthroughs. And sometimes it's that pressure you put on yourself. You just have to get through. Now, some markets, you have to get the product to a certain maturity, and that's hard in certain clients. And then the breakthrough happens. Then it looks easy. So anyway, your story is, I mean, that's exactly, I went through that with almost every one of my companies at one point or another. I mean, if you want to have a storyline now, that might scare people away, but if it's part of the process, in my opinion, right? So, um,
so let's go back to your latest challenge. So you are CEO and the chaos search. So what again personally motivates you to lift one more time the comfort zone, to
yeah.
be a general manager for the storage, where in your times in steel the IBM is growing in this area and is doing well, but you're saying, okay, let's try something new. So I would like to understand how the Ed is going to the new office, and what kind of the questions you're asking to the team. What do we need to do first? Uh,
Okay. So a couple of things there. So why I went there, is similar to all my others, right? So I was very happy at IBM. Just be clear, right? IBM filled every part of my challenge requirement. $6 billion division, great team, almost an embarrassment of riches of hard technology to bring to market. I loved it, but and it was nice. I was at the right level at IBM, right? So, but again, a person I knew, technical founder, who actually pitched me this idea in 2013. And at the time, it was too early. I said, and he was just thinking about it. So then we went our separate ways. We kept in touch, but not regularly. And basically, we got back together for a beer right before COVID because we actually had a beer. So it's right before February. What is it? 2020. Whenever this whole thing started. And then same thing. Large market. He was built from a ground up, clean architecture that, clean sheet of paper that was going to disrupt, but more importantly, directly challenge all the directly address the challenge of analytics at scale. And if you could imagine what he was building, it would change what people do today. And then if once they go to this new technology, they couldn't imagine going back. It would just be too expensive, too hard. So to me, by the way, same scenario with Avamar and Storewise. So once I saw that and it was big, it wasn't hard for me. Now, it took me a little bit to make sure I was doing the right things by IBM. And, so I didn't start there till, September of that year. But to me, it was right team. Team's important. Thomas Hazel's a founder, but it was also the team around him. But I'll tell you, I love Tom Hazel, technical founder. Again, that's where I fit in. I'm a good complement to that. And then listen, it's everything we talked about. We have this unbelievable technology that if you're going to do analytics in the cloud, you have all these challenges that have been in doing analytics, the whole data prep, data islands. How do you do plan for Black Friday events? And you have to plan all stuff and how much just absolute cost, data moving all over, data's growing. So all the same analogies. But the way you do building analytics, prepping data, and doing analytics on it has not changed significantly as far as the infrastructure and what you have to do to get that data in the right shape at scale. 23 years. It's been incrementally getting better. You're incrementally. So they're brand new, these new ETL companies where you take data, you extract it, transform it, and load it. But it's a $15 billion industry. But basically, it's largely the same. Someone needs to do analyzing data, you duplicate it, you move it to another place, you put it in a specific schema, which is a database in the end. And but you're moving data all over the place, and it takes really technical people, DBAs, data scientists, DevOps, to do any of that work. So it's just the toil's overwhelming. You end up not with one or two, you end up with host of these things all over. So from the ground up, literally come in, just stream your data into your cloud of choice. Think about AWS, Google, Azure, but just stream it into your standard storage, S3, point us at it, and we allow you to go after that at scale with your tools. We publish open APIs, use your Elastic tools. We're coming out with SQL right now, SQL tools, machine learning. The difference between this and now, huge industry, largely incremental, incremental advancements over time. It largely looks the exact same process, different tools, better, but the data prep is still 80% of the challenge, and data is still overwhelming you. And once our customers go with us, you get the savings, you get the scale, and you get out of that toil. You're no longer doing all the data pipelines, all this ETL, all this data islands. You're not doing, planning for everything to be Black Friday. So you have to really think through each one. So the outcome is it's early adopters, but also now we get the mainstream people seeing the value. Now, typically startup think you got to nail a particular use case. Anyway, so now I'm going into it, but what I saw is a great team, unbelievable, great technology, but hard tech. And then I know I can help that team get that into very specific execution. And if you're doing any of those things, backup storage here, if you're going to really disrupt, you got to find your use case that you nail. Call it crossing the chasm, find your beachhead. It's because you have to focus a product, because you'll never get the product to, you're competing against very, very, very mature technologies. You have to find a spot that you can add value, and then and the value is the trade-off, because you're not as robust as the other things, or they don't do all the 87 things that they do because they've been around for 30 years. But once you hit that, so we're kind of at that moment. Like, and I will tell you, if we get together in 10 years from now, I'll tell you the exact moment that just took off, right? And we're accelerating. But all my companies have grown exponentially, but it's only when you look back in time. So that's what's exciting about me. Did I just cross that 6 months ago? Did I just get now? If you're honest with yourself, you don't know exactly when it takes off until you look back at it, if that makes sense. So anyway, that's my long-winded way
Mhm.
of saying I couldn't
But it's
resist.
still the hardest part. You know that is you're going into the right direction, but you don't know when. And this is a quite tough question because everybody would like to get this answer, especially in a team. Yeah, when, Ed, when?
But no, yeah.
uh,
And in the end, when you do it, like just when you're in the midst of it, you don't like Avomar. I can tell you the exact date. I think it was February 6th. I don't know, but I used to remember the date of that launch. That moment is when it took off, right? But that's at that moment, I don't think I saw it. Anyway, so make a long story short,
yeah.
I look at chaos is very similar, but it's a leap of faith, right? So a bunch of my friends, mentors, no, don't do that, right? So also with kind of a really nice job at IBM, don't do that. Like, but to me, it's something I couldn't resist. It was gonna be too much fun, and living the dream, which is code word for getting there. It's living dream isn't all positive. It's a lot of hard work, just like big companies. So
Yeah, I remember when I, just founded the Storware with Jan, and the lots of friends, also mentors says, "Don't do this." Yes, I remember the same quotation, but I said once, like, if I will not try, if I will not lose, it doesn't matter if I will win or lose.
yeah,
I need to be sure that I are capable of doing it, or I'm not. If I will not do this, I will always, way back and says, "Gosh, I wish I could try." Of course, everybody wants to lose. It's like in a
yeah,
sport. Yeah, you don't go to the competition to just be the third or the fourth. You just always want to be the first. But uh,
but
yeah,
my
you
advice on
mentioned about that. Go on.
Oh, no, sorry. My advice on friends, right? So when I go to friends and mentors, now why do I keep on going back to them asking them for advice and I don't take their advice, right? Sometimes I always ask them why. So I get their thought process. And typically their thought process is more the fear of me failing. So in other words, they
Okay.
don't want me to go there. Why? Well, it's too hard. It's this or that. Like, so if you can ask friends why they didn't, or mentors, right? Why, it's really insightful. And then you have to kind of take that to heart and say, you know what? I understand that, but I'm willing that's not part of my calculus. So that's not part of the math I'm doing. So I still go back to the
Well,
same people who have told me multiple times, don't do it. But I like their advice because they think about it differently, and if I can get them to so just FYI, I think you still go to your friends and cohorts, but that doesn't mean that if someone discourages you, always ask why. Like, why? Give me your thought, because it is helpful. It's a sounding board. Anyway, so I digress. So
one of the questions that I actually I got in my notebook is that if you could mention some names who actually inspired you, or who is your mentor in a daily basis. Of course, if it's confidential, do not tell.
uh,
But let's say you had a scenario. I would like to be like him or her, or who normally you challenge in your thoughts in a daily basis.
so mentorship. If you can find a mentor, um, and those are kind of found and developed. I didn't through my first startup. It was just a bunch of us going and just doing, right. And maybe each of us, we didn't know any more than the other. We were naive. We just ran after it and was successful. So my first mentorship was, and it wasn't always like well, it wasn't always easy. Was a guy named Tom Hudson who bought my first company, and he was the CEO of this company called CNT. He was a long-term IBM vet, so he kind of knew mentorship because IBM's very kind of organized about this, which is why IBM will always be successful. But he kind of took me by the ear, and by the way, I was about to leave. I sold my company and I was about to leave after a year and do the next thing. And he took me by the ear over a cell phone, but kind of, you young whippersnapper, you know a lot, but you move to Minnesota, which for geography is just a very cold place in the United States. And although we ended up loving it, right? But you think, okay, move here, move your family here, and I'll show you how to run the business. Best thing I've ever had, right?
Mhm.
And that really put me in a different trajectory. The people I keep up with, I end up having really good board members. Now, also message on the board members, your board members aren't your friends, but I learn a lot from them, from the questions they ask, and I do engage with them kind of open. One of the things is transparency is your friend. Um, and then I have really good friends. I have a moth in the house. So I have a really good friend, John McCart. I could keep listing. I'm going to leave out some friends and they're going to be mad at me. Tony Prigmore, John McCarthy. I go to certain people all the time. And what you're looking for is some friends that you want balance point, but they're willing to kind of not argue with you, but give you the counterpoint. So I go out of my way to do that. Also, I'll tell you, people at IBM, Tom Rosemilia, I say Arvind Krishna, who's the current CEO, he mentored me before he was CEO. So this is going back 2010. I'll tell you, that cat was wonderful, but it didn't feel comfortable all the time. But you could go to him, and the key thing about being a good friend or mentor is someone that you can listen to, and it not critical all the time, but questions you, makes you think differently, maybe points you in some direction. So sometimes mentors can coach, but more importantly, makes you just think it differently, and they hold you to a higher standard. And sometimes that's awkward, right? So,
Mhm.
and also, I always try to mentor, and part of mentorship is just helping someone develop. It's not necessarily telling them what to do, but part of that, you have to be willing to tell them kind of straight up, if, hey, you might need to think about this more, or hey, that behavior might be disruptive, right? So you need to challenge each other, and also on ideas. Anyway, so I believe in mentorship. I wish I had a good mentor earlier in my career. Just like I wish I got my MBA earlier in my career, right? Because I'm like, oh, I could have used this. So anyway,
Yeah,
so
I personally loved when we spoke in when we've seen in Vegas, and I told you about what the store we're doing, and what's my vision, what's our vision, and what will be the next path. And I remember that you told me that, yeah, here, I see that you are not ready. And first of all, I was, what the hell? Why are you saying me that I'm not ready? But when we started the thoughts, this kind of the feedback challenging you in a positive way, because you need to do your lesson learned and come back and say, okay, we need more time. When I the one of my personal challenge was give myself and my team more time. You will not close it in 3 years, in not even 5.
yeah.
But of course, from one one half of you would like to do it as fast as possible, but you cannot do some, especially when we're doing quite more advanced projects, when you need the experienced people, and this knowledge is not easily applicable to to 100 new Java developers, for example.
Yeah.
uh, so you need to have a space for yourself and for the companies to grow. Yeah.
Well, and hopefully, okay, so and hopefully, I was supportive. But some like that would be example. Maybe you're being kind to me. Listen. I think
No, it was,
too many people are too, like, when we're trying to talk, and they're not willing to give the other person kind of direct feedback. That's damaging. Especially in like a mentorship or a business relationship. If you can just be straightforward, one is easier. It doesn't feel comfortable sometimes, but if hopefully it came off as I was trying to help, right? But
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just trying.
do
I'm
not
not trying
take
to
it.
mess
I
with
take
you.
it only in a positive way. So I needed that time, believe me.
But that, I would
So
say, maybe not your situation, but others, like sometimes that gets a little awkward. But if you don't do it, you're actually doing that person a disservice. But you also have to do it if you're really trying to help someone. I think they sense it. it doesn't have to be mean-spirited, because I've also seen mean-spirited, like, feedback. That's not helpful. Anyway, so I digress. So, but
Uh,
and by the way,
le-
these journeys are 6 to 12 years. I mean, these journeys are not 3-year journeys. I mean, that is myth of, let me set up a website and, the there's a journey here, right? And the first
Mhm.
half or 3/4 are the harder part of it, right? Or at least the part where you have to just believe. You just have to keep going. Once it starts going, you're just lucky, or at least people look at you, you're lucky, right? So,
You will not believe, but we are close to 1 hour conversation right now, Ed. uh, so last question
sure.
from my side. Hopefully, we'll have a chance to maybe come back and deep dive more subjects. But I want to keep especially your time and our audience. Uh, we talk also, so we started with the backup and recovery. We talk about some disruption.
Yeah.
Then we talk about the Storwares and lots of stuff regarding the data, actually about the big data and analytics that you right now doing in a chaos search. If you could right now share with us your thoughts about where this market of the data, especially regarding the existing challenge that you are through from the analytics perspective, because we still see that there's a new wave of the new data, exabytes and zettabytes and more, where we will be in the next, even not 10 years, but 5 years from now, where there will be the major disruption.
Well, the biggest, okay, themes, and then I think it does take teams, companies to disrupt things, right? So,
Mhm.
and it's kind of hard to tell exactly how that's going to play out, right? So, I gave you a couple of examples from my career but hindsight is 2020. But I think the big themes: cloud for sure, data for sure. And by the way, data is I think we're going to talk about it's over. It's going to be 10 years from now the same story. It's just more and more data, right? So that's a hard challenge to solve. I don't think that's going to go away, but there's a lot of, and security is the other big theme. But I'll tell you, to store your data, access it, analyze it, back it up, make sure you protect it, both from a security, but also, just world events also kind of bring things up, right? So I know it's, in your neighborhood, it's right next door, right? So, which I should have probably opened with. Hope everyone's safe, and I know you have a lot of refugees, right? But I think some of the things, so I would put cloud data, are the big themes. Cloud, when you say that, it's everything going to Kubernetes. And maybe it's not Kubernetes, right? But everything's going to the architecture of containers. Because I think we leave out the particular names because those may or may not change. But there's also new challenges with how you run those clouds, right? There's some advantage to being in the clouds. There's also advantages from all the technology, how you can use the cloud, to the best level. Anyway, so I don't know if I'm answering the perfect question, but you know, I look for companies and on these bigger trends, and I don't think those bigger trends are going to change at least in the next 10 years. By the way, I'm not good at looking 20 years out. I'm my maybe not secret weapon, but I feel I'm really good at figuring out current
Mhm.
markets and then 5 to 10 years, right? But beyond that, I'm going to look to other people. It makes sense. Uh,
Y-
but the next
and
5 to 10 years, absolutely, there's going to be great innovation, and then that's what I'm hoping I'm going to change. I hoping what we're doing at KS Search is going to change some of the incumbencies there, right? And hopefully it plays out like it did at some of these other things. And I'm looking to have fun doing it, right? And
and
what
I
you guys
and
are doing is unbelievable. Like everything's going to go to the cloud, and all the old processes don't get there. You're going to have to do it differently. But if you don't think you need to manage, protect, access that data, you're wrong. And you don't try to bring the old stuff with you. It's not going to be appropriate, right? So anyway,
So if you would like to understand where the market is go, definitely go to the chaos search and see why Ed is investing his time and challenging himself to make the life and data better from the analytics point of view.
Yeah.
So
In Storware from what you're doing, I think it's fantastic, right? So I think you're on the right journey, and I think you're gonna look back and, it's always in hindsight. So living the
and I
dream.
believe that we'll have an opportunity to see each other, not virtually, but after this, weird times last 3 years, there will be some, space
Yeah.
that will speak face to face and
Right.
remind maybe this, not only this conversation, but the last few years and our decision on this as the entrepreneurs. Uh, so Ed, I would like to, really thank you. We are just, hitting the time, so I don't want to, just push the people beyond this time. My statement from today's session is that you met Ed Walsh today, not only as a CEO of a few companies that he ran or is still running right now, but you got his personal thoughts about how the leadership always should looks like. And Ed told you many times it's not only about himself, it's always about the proper people and proper technology behind the scenes. So let's always trying to look for to collect these two things. And of course we need to be in the right with the right people in the right time. So it's also important part. But
Agree.
this is what I remind from today's session. To summarize: dream big, get have enough gut to move forward. Do not be scared, and challenging yourself and leave the comfort zone, but always with the make a right choices based on a team that will help you not only in a good times, but especially in a bad times, like in a friends. Yes.
Yep. You said it perfectly, better than I did. So I agree.
Even that I cannot speak quite a good English, so
I
I
do too.
tried my best.
Yeah.
Uh, so again, I'm thrilled to have you for today, Friday Dose. For all of you who watching us on live, all the best Friday and the weekends, and who's all right now watching us on YouTube, you can always put some questions. We'll redirect this question to myself or the Ed, and we'll try to give you the answers. Hopefully that you enjoyed this 1 hour conversation. And again, from the whole Story team, and myself, Ed, I would like to thank you. Have a great day and a weekend, and stay in touch.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.